Carbohydrates are actually good for our body. We need carbohydrates for many reasons. I'm going to put another question here. Look at the foods here. Think for a few seconds. Which of these foods do you think have carbohydrates in them? The options are milk, eggs, apple, tomato, bread, spinach, and you can have multiple answers. There's no one answer. Spinach, chicken, potatoes, chickpeas. Okay, so I'll tell you the right answers, but then I'll also talk about that so you know in the future what is and what's not. So, but I'll tell you the ones that have carbohydrates are milk, apple, bread, potato, and chickpeas. Just the 5 out of all of these. Okay, and I'll tell you how to figure that out also. Most of my patients who think that they're on a low carb diet, they don't realize there's a lot of carbohydrates coming from other places. Just by cutting out bread is not necessarily a low carb, but we're not talking about low carb anyway. But I want you to know, because we have to control our carbohydrates. We are eating a lot more than we should. So we are going to control it, but we're not going to be very low. Okay. So before we get into that, we have to know what are the 5 food groups. I showed you the picture of the plate last time, so you might have an idea, but let's see if you know. I'm gonna ask you one more question here. So there are gonna be 5 right answers in this. What are the 5 food groups? Options are fruits, vegetables, meats, grains and starches. These are not carbohydrates. These are just food groups that Health Canada counts as food groups. Proteins that include meats and legumes, nuts and seeds, dairy products. I know this is a bit tricky, this question, I know that, but bear with me and I'll get to that. Starches, okay. So this is basically, it's good that you know, because in the future I'm going to be talking about food groups, you should know what a food group is. So there are 5 different food groups that we pair most foods into different groups. So one of them is vegetables. Now vegetables have 2 types, and I'll talk about that. And then we have grains and starches, meats and alternatives. So meats and alternatives, or we also call it protein. It's one of the largest food group, although it's stuck in that little corner there. But meat and alternatives have things like fish, lean meats like chicken, lamb, beef, so all meats. And then we also have beans like legumes, lentils, chickpeas, kidney beans, soybeans, all those beans, because they're high in protein. They have the same amount of protein as much as it's found in meat. So that's why we count that as meat and alternatives. And we also have nuts and seeds, which we count under this little protein section here, the meats and alternatives, okay? And then we have a fruit, and then we have a dairy. Now, if you are not eating meat and chickpeas or these beans are your meat and alternatives, then it's fine, because even if they're high in calories, your meat would be about the same amount of calories. Again, the portion matters, but that's that. So are you guys all good with the food groups? We have vegetables, fruits, dairy products, grains and starches, and meats and alternatives, okay? So let's talk about the food groups that do have carbohydrates. Actually, I'll make it simpler. So this tiny section here, the grains and starches. Now starches also contain starchy vegetables like potatoes, peas, corn. These are very starchy. So we don't really count them as a vegetable. We call them starchy vegetables, and we usually stick them in this little group here, because we want to separate the starches, the carbohydrates, from everything else. That's why these groups are divided into this corner here is the little corner, and the bottom is the carbohydrate corner. And then we have the protein corner, and then we have the healthy ingredients corner. And then these 2 on the side, milk and fruits, these also have carbohydrates. So milk has almost, like 1 cup of milk would have about 12 grams of carbohydrates, whereas a regular grain would have 15 grams of carbohydrates. So it's almost the same. It's a little less than a regular starch, but that's it. So if I expand this here, you'll know that a fruit, all types of fruit have carbohydrates in them. All grains, every type of grain that we know of right now, rice, breads, wheat, quinoa, everything, all of them have carbohydrates. Starchy vegetables like potatoes, corn, peas, and then dairy products like milk, yogurt, cheese. And in the protein section, there's only just like legumes and lentils that have carbohydrates in them. But the foods that do not have any carbohydrate, no, other than the legumes and lentils, no other meat products have carbohydrates. So meats have no carbohydrates. So eggs, chicken, fish, none of them have any carbohydrates in them. So if you were trying to control your carbohydrates, you were fine if you ate a lot more meats and eggs and stuff. And then all other non-starchy vegetables except for the potatoes, yams, corn, and peas, all other vegetables have no carbohydrates. So eggs fall under the protein and the meat and alternatives. So egg fall under the protein group and they have no carbohydrates. Okay. All right. So these are examples of foods that we commonly eat that have carbohydrates in them. These are mostly grains. So I'm going to give you all the examples that we can think of: rice, bread, pasta, cereals, porridge, crackers, biscuits, pancakes, noodles, pies, pastries, croissants, cakes, cookies, muffins, donuts. If you think about it, our diet is pretty much filled with all of these, right? Rotis, parathas, and then the starchy vegetables, potatoes, peas, sweet potatoes, squash, yams, lentils, legumes. Even though some of these are healthy, they're still going to be counted as carbs or starches. And then all fruits and all dairy products. Are we good?